Much as I love talking strategy, many folks need to put points on the board, right, immediately, and especially if you're new in a role. I almost guarantee you no one has done this in the business. And if you ask people how the last pricing change went, you'll get a bunch of different answers. You can either earn or lose a lot of trust in the cancellation process because it's the last thing that a customer goes through. Most people I talk to, there's a big monetization awareness problem. There's a lot of talk about the opportunity to monetize AI in different ways, but not a ton of action just yet. I'd advocate that it's really helpful to have that, especially in this current environment where everyone's looking for that information.
I'm really excited about today's episode. Today we have Kyle Poyar. Kyle, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on your podcast.
So Kyle really needs no introduction, but if you don't know him, when it comes to product-led growth in SaaS, he is one of the top thought leaders in the space. As an operating partner at OpenView, he spent the past 8 years studying things like pricing and packaging in SaaS, which is what we're going to talk about today. And he shares many of those findings in his Growth Unhinged newsletter on Substack, which I have been recommending for years to folks. Today we're going to break down everything you need to know about SaaS pricing. We collaborated on a few pieces about this earlier this year, actually, in the Product Growth newsletter. So this is a topic both of us have spent a lot of time researching and thinking about. So let's start right at the top. The first thing that's going to influence your pricing and packaging is if you're B2B or B2C. So can you talk about the major types of B2B and B2C SaaS pricing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you think about pricing in general for a technology product, you've got a bunch of decisions to make, right? You don't maybe think that it comes down to the price point, right? Is it $9.99, $8.99, $15.99? That's part of it. It's an especially big part of it in a B2C world. But there's actually a lot more decisions you have to make that underpins it. So the first part is, what are the packages that you offer? Is it one package or are there multiple packages? In B2B, you often have more flexibility there because you could maybe have different packages aimed at different customer segments or different product cases or different teams, right, who maybe have different budgets. In a B2C setting, you're usually a little bit more on the simplistic side, right? You don't want a whole lot of friction for customers. You also want to decide, do you have a free offer, right? Do you have some sort of approach around product-led growth to let people try before they buy? That could be a freemium plan, that could be a free trial, could be a reverse trial, some combination of the above. And then you also want to look at a value metric for your pricing. Now, the value metric's the primary unit that defines how much a given customer pays. If you're a B2C company, you often don't really have a value metric. You're essentially charging a fixed price for an individual. But if you're in a B2B context, you're selling to an account that maybe has one individual user that could use your product or could have thousands of users who use the product a lot. And so you have flexibility to charge per seat based on usage, maybe even based on the success people have or the ROI they received with the product. And then from there, you got the price point itself as a decision. And then the final thing I just add is any sort of promotions or discounts, right? And so in a B2C context, often people are going and Googling to try to find a promo code, right, for your offer. In a B2B context, they're just talking to a sales rep to get that discount. But often the price that you put on your website is not the same thing as the price that your customers end up buying a product for. And so you need to think about that as part of the overall pricing strategy mix. So it's I'd leave people with, there's a whole series of things that you need to decide as part of your pricing. And there's a bit of a difference, right, between a B2B context and a B2C context.
Yeah, there is. And at the same time, I feel like the distinction is overblown. There will be like B2C people who refuse to study B2B. And I think that in particular is a mistake. Because B2B is a little bit more complex and the buyers are willing to accept that complexity, what I noticed in writing our two deep dives was that the B2B companies had generally implemented some of the techniques that B2C companies would 3 to 5 years in advance. So they might release multiple packages, and now you see way more consumer companies like Netflix releasing an ad tier. Or they might release a reverse trial, and you see way more consumer companies now starting people in a reverse trial format. A lot of those things actually came from B2B, where it is a little bit more complex. Have you noticed the same thing?
What's interesting, the trends go back and forth, right? Because I'd also say on the B2B side, many folks didn't really have much of product-led growth offering in the first place and borrowed that from the consumer side. They saw, hey, consumers were actually really comfortable going out, finding products and deciding what to buy. And, at the end of the day, people that work in businesses are just consumers, in a work context. And so they have the same quality of, they expect the same quality out of their applications that they have in the personal life. They expect that in their business apps too. And they're increasingly empowered to go find great tools, maybe put them down on a credit card and then advocate for which ones to buy. And so, from a buyer standpoint, that initial purchase is often very much informed by the consumer psychology, even if they work in a business. So it definitely goes both sides, and it's interesting to see both sides actually learn from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. The B2B people should also be learning from the B2C. For now, let's narrow in on the B2B side for a second. So as we wrote about in our piece, there are really two predominant models. There's the seat-based model, and then there's the usage-based model. Can you explain those and the major differences?
Absolutely. Well, so when you look at those two, so that's, again, getting back to the value metric, right, that defines what a given customer pays. The reason this is so critical is because you're generally looking for the most efficient way to land and expand your customers. And so to expand your customers, you want actually a given cohort of customers to spend more and more and more on your products over time as they deepen the usage and number of people using the product. And so that means you got to limit that initial offering in some way. You can't just offer unlimited use for everyone, or there's going to be nothing that you can keep selling them. So you got to limit it in some way, but you also don't want to overly limit it in a way that people start hoarding their licenses, or they start not wanting to share it internally. Maybe they're worried about going over and having the shock expense. And so users and usage have been the two primary ways that folks have to find this land and expand opportunity. And users came from, I would say, decades old pricing. We used to have a world where software was installed on a physical machine. And so you'd have users that were actually licensed based on their machine to access a given piece of software. When we moved to cloud-based models, that seat as a unit, we no longer needed to be in the same seat to use the software, but that concept just felt natural to extend into subscription cloud software as well. And so it's something that's easy for people to wrap their head around. It's easy to budget for. If you're hiring 10 people for the next year, you can just think, all right, got to budget 10 extra licenses for this software as well. And so that's been, I would say, the predominant way that B2B software businesses have charged for the past 2-3 decades. By the way, it still works for many companies. If you look at Salesforce, if you look at Slack, there's many companies that still charge on a seat-based model. I think people started to realize, though, there's a lot of software products where value isn't tied to having more human users logging in. Some software like AI products, can look at Intercom's new AI chat product. It has AI resolving chat requests so that you need fewer customer support people to answer those requests. If they charge based on how many people were logging into Intercom, they would make less money as their product was working better for their customers. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. And so we look at more of usage models or other kind of creative pricing models as a way to say, let's actually let everyone in the company access this product. So we'll kind of open up access to it, and we'll charge on the basis of the value that they see. And what's the best proxy for value? Actual real life usage of the product. And so I've been a fan of the rise of usage-based models. Now there's obviously its own set of challenges too, but in theory, usage-based models really well align with the outcomes that customers are getting. They create a lot of flexibility for people to start small and expand their usage over time. And they're just more modern at reflecting the kinds of products built today, which often involve AI, automation, and APIs rather than more and more human users of the software.
This episode is brought to you by Addio, the next generation CRM. Imagine a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and actually intuitive. Addio makes that a reality. As I've profiled in the Product Growth newsletter, setting up Addio takes less than a minute, and within seconds of syncing your email and calendar, you'll see your relationships in one place, enriched with valuable data, including things like relationship strength. Addio lets you build Zapier-style automations, create powerful reports, and works for any go-to-market motion, from PLG to sales-led. Addio is designed for the next era of companies like yours. And companies like yours shouldn't have to deal with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRMs. Join industry leaders like 11 Labs, Replicate, and Modal. Head to addio.com/productgrowth and you'll get 15% off your first year. That's attio.com/productgrowth. Today's episode is brought to you by Cello. The future of marketing is word of mouth. Turn your users and partners into your most valuable growth channel with Cello. Cello is the only all-in-one solution to engage your most passionate users and partners to refer your product with just a few clicks. Best of all, Cello is directly embedded into your product and handles everything from referral payments to tax and compliance. Here's how it works. First, within a few hours, Cello integrates with your product. Then, in your dashboard, you can set up your referral campaign and make the referral experience your own. Finally, after the program goes live, Cello continuously analyzes and scales its performance based on AI recommendations. Give it a try for free at cello.so. That's CELLO.so. Yeah, and in our study of 50 companies, we found that it was the infrastructure companies who first adopted usage-based pricing, which makes sense because their costs also scale with usage. So to maintain those economics, usage-based pricing makes a lot of sense. And with the new AI products that are so costly to run, where those GPU inference and training cycles cost you a lot of money, we're seeing way more companies adopt usage-based pricing for those AI products as well. Is there a set of rule of thumbs or some razors that people can use if they're trying to decide one model or the other?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first thing, just make sure people understand the best way to figure out pricing is to have conversations with your customers, right? Understand what pricing models they would accept, right? How do they budget for your product? What does that look like? What is it, like if there's a shock expense? So really, you can and should be asking customers questions about pricing and willingness to pay, even though those can feel like really uncomfortable conversations. You actually get an amazing amount of learnings from them. So that's the best source of truth. But realistically, the ways that I think about this decision of users versus usage is, all right, what do we actually want from our value metric? We want something that aligns with the value that our customers are getting from using this product. And so if there's more users within a given account, are they also getting, that proportional value or not? And so you might look at a HubSpot, for example, and say, all right, HubSpot does email marketing. If we have more people that have user seats, I guess we could maybe send out more emails, but it's probably not like a one-to-one value alignment. If the customers are getting more contacts that they can market to, and then the email tools allow them to reach even more contacts, that actually feels really aligned with the value the customers are getting. So that customer value piece is really kind of first and foremost in my mind. There's also a component around what's growing in a given customer. And so you want to price around a metric that tends to be predictably increasing in a given account. So if you're a telecom company, at some point you might have charged based on how many minutes your customers talked on the phone. But you might have realized that's actually not a great metric to charge based on, because minutes of talk is probably going down and people are seeing more and more value in other things, like the data that they have access to, right? That using the internet on their phone. And so you want to find a metric that you think is going to increase as customers deepen kind of their experience with the product. And that creates makes those dynamics really natural for a customer. The other thing that would just flag as most critical is you have to have something that you can actually measure and implement. And so seats are a really natural thing. It's really clearly defined. You can tie it to an individual person, although there is still some friction around managing licenses and sharing licenses and so on. And then usage metrics get a little bit more complicated. There's some metrics that you can figure out in your product, and then there's some metrics that your customers actually measure, but they don't necessarily tell you what those are or what those actually, how they're growing in a real-time basis. And so you want to look for metrics that you have the ability to monitor and enforce in your pricing. Otherwise, even if you thought a usage-based model was the best thing for your business, you're never really going to be able to launch a usage-based model.
Makes sense. And what impact does being product-led or sales-led have on that?
So usage-based versus per seat, there's some interesting dynamics there with product-led and sales-led. Both companies do both things. And so there's a lot of companies that are product-led that charge based on seats. There's a lot of companies that are, product-led and charge based on usage. And so the thing that I would emphasize for folks is that if you are considering a usage-based model, you actually have to become more of a product-led organization. And what I mean by that is if the thing that drives the amount of revenue you get from a given customer is how much your customers consume the product, it becomes really critical that your product team is investing in things like usability, is making sure the product experience is really sticky, is making sure the roadmap actually drives more usage and more value for customers. If you go down a usage-based pricing route, but your product team isn't thinking from a product-led growth mindset, you might create this really big disconnect where you're not able to capture the revenue opportunity of a usage-based model. Because remember, in a usage-based model, people are essentially deciding whether or not to pay your product, not so much on the basis of a big commitment upfront or via subscription, but on the basis of whether they log in and use your product in a given point in time. And so PLG becomes more of an imperative if you have this idea of a usage-based model. The other thing I just flag for folks is really understand the dynamics of adoption within an account. And so if you're for instance a product-led organization, what happens is that initially people sign up for, try, and buy the product usually without talking to someone on the sales team. In a sales-led organization, the usual interaction is someone has the conversation with sales. Now, in that product-led motion, the most successful companies land with an individual user or a team and then ultimately expand into much larger deal sizes. And so if you study that motion of how that happens, you have to have some sort of reason that creates someone to go from individual user to team to be interested in that company-wide adoption. And seat-based pricing can scale really well that way, especially if you have a product that has viral and a built-in collaborations like a Miro. Everyone naturally wants to invite their team because it's a collaboration product. And so someone will start using it, they'll share the product with others, all of a sudden they start to have more and more user seats, and then all of a sudden sales is able to reach out and allows for volume discounts really and more feature functionality and so on. But there are other cases where in a product-led growth model, that first user pays for a seat license and they don't want anyone else to have access to their seat because that was their budget, they got approval, they don't want to go to their boss asking for more money, and they start to hoard that account in a way that's really unhealthy for expansion. And so either model, like usage-based pricing or seat-based pricing, either could work, but you really have to study the mechanics of how the product is adopted at a given customer and what role your pricing plays in either creating friction for that adoption or removing friction.
Really well put. And then there's one third option that we haven't even talked about, which is you can do both, which is what a lot of people are doing these days. I most recently was a VP of product at Apollo.io. We made substantial revenue from both levers and substantial expansion levers. So just to explain to people listening, if they don't know Apollo, every sales team is going to buy a data tool. So Apollo scales via seats as your sales team scales, but different sales teams might have different needs for the amount of data. So it also, after you reach certain caps per seat, has usage-based pricing that most, especially big clients who are willing to pay more, do tap into. And so this is kind of that combined model. Can you talk a little bit about how common that is and when you might know as a company on either model that you should think about a combination?
Yeah, these hybrid models are definitely more and more interesting. And, generally the trick is, from a business standpoint, you'd love to be a hybrid model because that means you have more ways of making money, right? You can grow as folks start to, share the product with more people in the account. And you can also grow as people use the product more, or you can exponentially grow as customers do both. It's pretty amazing. The challenge is it can feel like the customer is kind of constantly worried about a shock expense or their bill, starting at $100 a month and then all of a sudden it's $10,000 a month and they have no idea what happened. And so the goal is to try to make it, have this pricing that provides opportunities for expansion while making the customer feel like they're in control of their spend. That spend is still connected to the value that they're receiving, and they really understand, right? So the pricing is simplified enough, and so in these models, you really want to look for ways to simplify things. So, for example, you might say, hey, the basic package is $10 per seat, but it has a limit of 500 maybe contacts that seat can access in a given day. And so for that individual user that's going to Apollo.io or any other tool, it's really affordable to get started, and they have a product that you can use it as an individual really well. But as soon as you start to think about automation or how do you scale to 10x what you're doing, you'll quickly hit into that credit limit or that contact limit. But that's also a very different use case for the product than what you had initially. And so the idea is really give folks what they need when they're getting started to really have the product deliver on the value proposition when someone found it, but then have ways that feel really organic to expand from there.
Makes sense. And then the final component, all of us product people, we've spent the past 2 years launching AI functionality. And I feel like you have done the industry leading research on how people are pricing AI functionality. So can you explain that to us?
So it's a fascinating topic. I've looked at companies that are AI native companies, right, founded as AI businesses, and how do they approach pricing? And then also businesses that are more traditional software businesses that have added some sort of AI SKU or repositioning their companies as AI. Really what I found is that there's a lot of talk about the opportunity to monetize AI in different ways, but not a ton of action just yet. People are still resorting to these classic dynamics of seat-based pricing or maybe some usage-based pricing. But a lot of it is, I think that folks are actually not that sophisticated with their pricing. They spent all this time on a really innovative product, and then they either said, we're going to give it away for free and see how people use it, and then we'll figure out pricing later. Or they just went with a model that felt really simple to get off the ground, right? So maybe they charge $10 per seat for the core product, and now they're going to charge an extra $5 per seat if you want an AI add-on, right? So they haven't really gotten that sophisticated with how they think about AI pricing. The exceptions are, it's fascinating to find some of the emerging crop of next generation AI startups who are really able to think about AI monetization from a first principles standpoint because they don't have this install legacy base of customers on a different pricing model. And so many of them are exploring models like success-based pricing. That's actually really fascinating. So if you had a service, for example, that the customer might have otherwise paid a consultant to go do, or maybe a contractor, maybe hired someone to do internally, and now AI plus software can actually kind of offload this service and do it, maybe even do a better job and do it faster. Now you can actually charge on the basis of the real value that you deliver, the work that you're doing for the customer. And that actually unlocks potentially different budgets than classic technology budgets, more overall spend, and a lot of alignment, because you can tell the customer, we're not going to charge you anything if we don't deliver results. We're only going to get paid if we make you money. And so we actually have a portfolio company at OpenView called ChargeFlow that automates the chargeback management process that merchants and digital businesses go through. And usually this is a super time-intensive process to dispute a chargeback. And for many merchants, they lose a lot of money because they just frankly don't get to it or don't have the capabilities to do it. And so ChargeFlow says, hey, let's connect to our systems and we'll have AI plus automation manage this process for you. And we'll take 25% of whatever incremental revenue we're able to get back for you. That's an incredibly disruptive value proposition that makes it a no-brainer for a customer to try out, and then means that actually spend can grow pretty substantially as the ROI is naturally increasing. And so that's a model that I think AI unlocks, this kind of creative, disruptive model that can increase the overall kind of amount of technology spend like present in businesses, but that we're in the very, very early innings of exploring models like this. Like Intercom has a similar model. There's a number of other AI companies that are piloting these things, but there's still a lot more to learn.
Yeah, we still see the typical just put it on a higher plan, increase the price. But those exceptions, I think that's where people want to go and study and see what can I learn from that. So how does SaaS pricing typically evolve for a company? I saw a really cool post from you on LinkedIn a couple months back that talked about the typical stages from pre-revenue to 100 million ARR. Can you break those down for folks?
Absolutely. Well, if you think about the stages of a startup, in the very early stages, you're just wanting nothing to get in the way of getting people to try your product and give you feedback. And so you're often, purposefully underpriced. You're maybe trying to validate that someone will pay for it, right? And they'll have, that way they have some skin in the game and actually implement it. But you're almost never losing a deal over price in the early days because that customer feedback is so valuable. And then what happens is you start to figure out, all right, who's the best customer who finds the most value in my product? You start building a lot more things for the beta customers you have. So your product looks so much better, after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months than it did before. And you get more confidence because you have proof points that it actually works. You have ROI case studies. You have all of these great things. And so when a company goes from seed stage, where they're less than $1 million in revenue, to north of $1 million in revenue, they start to increase their price by an average of 60%. And so pretty substantial amount of money. And I know that's an average. And so there's many companies out there that don't touch pricing. Maybe they're afraid to change it, or they don't have anyone that is in charge of pricing. And so just isn't really looking at this as a lever. And then you have other businesses that may be 2x, 3x, 4x their price point, and customers accept it. So you can expect pricing to be a really substantial lever in those early stages, but then it actually is still a lever going forward. And so when a business is going from that, call it, let's say, they went from the 0 to 1 and raised a price around 60% post that $1 million in ARR, as they're getting to call it 20 million or so ARR, and are really kind of in that growth stage, they have this repeatable motion, they're putting their foot on the gas, they tend to increase prices by an average of about 40% at that point. And usually that's in a different way. It's not just across the board price increases, it's a little bit more surgical. And so that's looking at, hey, maybe we started as a seat-based pricing company, but we're going to move to hybrid to give us another expansion level because we see these customers with a small number of seats and a lot of usage, and there's opportunities there. or we're going to offer this higher tier plan. We had an enterprise plan, and now we're going to roll out an enterprise plus plan at a higher price, or an AI SKU at a higher price, right? So there's a lot of opportunities to build more products that you can monetize and then increase the overall price from a customer. And then it honestly doesn't go away. So before I was in consulting, before I was in venture, I spent 6 years in consulting at a firm called Simon Kucher, which is the world's leading consulting firm specializing in pricing and packaging. And most of my clients were companies around IPO or maybe recent IPO, and they still had a substantial opportunity to optimize pricing and packaging. Now, at that point, it's way more scientific. You get more into how's the sales team discounting, right? What's the sales execution? What's the region by region pricing, and can we optimize local pricing? You maybe have a lot of SKUs, and you need to get into how do you bundle your different products together so that you can present more simplified offers to customers. And so pricing and packaging doesn't actually go away, but there's opportunity throughout. The opportunities change, though, as you scale.
Fascinating. So pricing more than doubling as you move through those stages and continuing to be iterated on. But you mentioned those people who are scared. And I think part of the reason they're scared is because they just don't know what the right way to announce a pricing change is. They've been on the brunt end of bad pricing change announcements from Spotify, Netflix, Salesforce, etc. So what are the right and wrong ways to announce a pricing change?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's certainly been some cases you might have seen, Unity or others, that had some pretty substantial backlash, right, from pricing changes. I think the first thing I look at is if you're an early stage business, let's say you're a business with $1 million in revenue, but your goal is to get to 20 or 30 million in the next few years. You might not actually need to change your pricing on existing customers. Those were folks that were really loyal. They took a chance on your product before others would. And if you fast forward to a few years from now, they're only going to be a few percentage of your overall revenue. And so you'll start looking at changing pricing on new cohorts of customers. And for them, it's not a pricing change. That's just how your pricing is, and they either think it's fair or it's not fair. And so there's no publicity around it. There's no attention. There's no backlash. That's actually one of the kind of easiest ways to change pricing, is to just not announcing that you're changing pricing. And in fact, for some folks, you can use it as a marketing play to pull forward demand, right? You can take customers that maybe got a quote with the legacy pricing and say, hey, we're going to honor this for another 2 weeks, and then pricing is going up. But lock in your old price now, kind of a thing. As you scale, more and more of your revenue growth comes from your install base. And so, for instance, I did a study and I looked at, for businesses that were, let's call it 50 million in revenue, and where their growth had started to slow down, about half of any of the future growth would come from expanding existing customers, and then half was going to come from net new customers. And so for, if you're finding yourself in that position of, being in a relatively mid to large company, you don't have that luxury of just say, hey, we're going to ignore our existing pricing and let them keep it as is. And so for them, you really have to be thoughtful. And the way I think about it is you have different options at your disposal. But there's some rules of thumb to consider. First is make sure you validated the strategy that you have. And so if you try to launch something with existing customers and it's a half-baked plan, and then you actually want to change it in a month later or 2 months later, you really can't change pricing on your customers twice in a short period of time. They just won't accept it. And so make sure you've done your homework, and oftentimes that means you've actually previewed it, or you've done surveys or interviews with customers so you really feel confident in what you're going forward with. The next thing I'd look at is what is that actual pricing change that a customer sees? And so if you're changing pricing that's just, hey, we're going to do a 10% price increase, people are, it's across the board, people understand it, maybe they've seen that with inflation or other vendors, that seems fair. But for other companies, they might say, hey, we're going to charge, we used to charge you based on seats, now we're going to charge you based on seats and usage. And for these 5 customers, their usage is so high that their price might be 10x or maybe even more than that, larger than it used to be. And that's when you start getting into some really tricky areas where you can get a lot of backlash and potential churn, even though you see it as maybe mathematically, this is a model that worked really well. And for those folks, I'll often want a more custom migration plan for that specific customer. And so you might say, hey, you're actually able to keep your pricing as is with a higher amount of usage, but you're going to move to this new plan. So if your usage increases in the future, then you'll pay us for any of that increased usage. But we're just going to say you're going to keep your legacy price point. Or you might say, hey, you can stay on your plan for as long as you want, but you're not going to get any of the new features that we're going to launch. And these are the really interesting new features. And so we think you're going to want to upgrade to this new tier, but totally your call. When people feel like they have choice like that and that their loyalty is recognized, it makes them a lot more likely to accept pricing changes. Like one of the things that Netflix did so well with pricing is that you might have remembered they had the big Quickster debacle, like unbundling the DVDs from their online streaming pricing, and it was chaotic. It caused them to not really change pricing for a while. Afterwards, they've now changed pricing just about every year like clockwork, and no one ever notices. One of the things they've done now is they started getting really strategic around having different offers for customers if they don't want to deal with the price increase. So you can say, hey, you can keep your price, but you're going to be downgraded to a plan that has ads, which is fine, right? Or you can keep your price, but you only get 2 people that can be watching your Netflix account at any point in time. You can't share it with a bunch of other people. And so people now have the option, if they're price conscious, that's a really big concern, there's an option for them. But if they really, like Netflix, they're spending a lot of time watching it, they love the original content, they also want the convenience, they can spend a few extra dollars a month, and it's their call. I tend to find that feeling of choice goes a long way. And the final thing I'd say is the communication of the pricing change matters a lot. If you just say, hey, we're doing this, it's happening, get used to it, that's probably not going to go over so well. But if you can explain, hey, here's all of the things that we've done in the last year where we've improved the product, added more value for you. Here's what we're going to be doing in the next 6 months or 12 months that are going to give you a better experience. And in order to fund this innovation, we need to adjust our pricing. People will start to feel more of a connection and an understanding. And I've even found in a B2B context, people don't normally tell this to a founder or a product manager, but they'll sometimes tell this to me as a VC. I will hear comments like, I was confused with that pricing because I didn't know how they would build a real business around what they were doing. And I was nervous that they were going to go out of business, right? Because they were charging so little for what they did. And so sometimes your customers are actually much more understanding of price increases, and they understand you've got a business to run. They want you to be around for the long term, and they want you to keep improving their product. And so just remember that price isn't the only thing that they care about. Really, they care about building a relationship with you where you're both going to get a lot of value.
I challenge anyone to find 3 minutes of more density on how to do a pricing change. That was awesome. So let's move on now to some of the tried and true pricing levers out there. We've covered all of the basics. So let's go into the pricing page. For my money, this is like the most important pricing lever out there. So if you were to create like a best practices template for a pricing page, what would it look like?
It's a great question. Well, first off, I just flag a lot of companies don't have a pricing page. And so if you look in a B2B context, it's maybe only about 1/3, maybe 1/2, but like probably around 1/3 of B2B software companies have any sort of public pricing. I'd advocate that it's really helpful to have that, especially in this current environment where everyone's looking for that information. Buyers are going and seeking it out, and they're either going to find it on your site or they're going to find it elsewhere. And there's a lot of other places where they can seek it out through places like Vendor, Tropic, through review sites, through their communities, through even DMing folks that they see are connected with you. on LinkedIn. And so I'd rather have that traffic coming from me and also the ability to control the message around the pricing page. And so let's say you've decided, hey, you agree, you want to have a pricing page. Remember, there's a pricing page on your website that is, to me, primarily a marketing page. And then there'll also be a pricing page in the app where someone actually makes a purchase decision. And those two should be very related, but they don't need to be the same because they're solving different goals for your business and for your customer. The pricing that is on your website as a marketing page, remember, this is often the number 2 most visited page on your site, often the most popular one outside of the homepage. You're getting people that don't totally understand what you do just yet. And so the first kind of key thing I would encourage folks to remember is don't, just throw your product requirements on your pricing page where it's a bunch of features and checkboxes. Remember that you need to educate your customers around the value proposition of who you're for, what do you do, and what are the results that they're going to see. From there, once you've kind of clarified that, I want to make sure that you show the plans that you have. So what are the different ways that people can work with you? And you don't need to be transparent around the pricing for everything, right? You don't need to show the price points of the enterprise plan. But if you can communicate, we've got a free plan, we've got a basic plan that is, an affordable price point. We've got a premium plan, we've got an enterprise plan. That is something that people can digest. It's relatively simple. They see that they have options, right? What you're getting to is you're helping them feel like they can see themselves using your product. They can start to educate themselves around, what plan might be right for them, and you're not shutting down the conversation. You're also able to say, hey, if this is an enterprise buyer, you maybe want to contact us because you maybe have some specific needs or some customization in your pricing, and we have plans for people like you. Right? But if you're just an individual that wants to try something out, you can get started for free, right? So remember, this is a marketing page. So you're driving action. You're wanting to drive people to sign up for the product or to, talk to someone on your team to eventually buy. The other thing that I see that happens, so then you start to look at the differentiation between the plans. So you got these maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 plans. People need to grok what's different about them and which plan feels right for them. And you often want to, obviously make the more expensive plans seem better, but you don't want to make the free or the cheap plans seem unusable, right? That they're just decoys. And so the things for me are speak in terms of the benefits or the capabilities that your customers are going to get, as opposed to feature jargon that they don't totally understand just yet. You also want to make it clear that the core job to be done that your product solves is available in every plan, right? And so if you're a visual collaboration tool like a Miro, you need to have some sort of basic visual collaboration in every plan. If you're a meeting scheduling app like a Calendly, which is an OpenView portfolio company, that needs to be available in every plan and it needs to be front and center. But then you need to have smart paywalls or different levers where people can see that as they get more sophisticated in their needs, or if they just have a more complicated business that has more detailed enterprise requirements, that you have those available in plans. But it's kind of very clear to understand who each plan is for and why that person should buy it without making them, not trust the entire setup of the pricing in the first place. So those are the core principles, but, ultimately comes down to the goal is to build a relationship that actually drives people to action, and that action is investing more time actually giving your product a try.
Let's talk about one of the biggest untapped opportunities in product management, unstructured data. You've got tons of it: customer calls, emails, surveys, tickets, Slack messages, you name it. We all know that hidden in that chaos are the insights that could define our next product feature. But how do you extract those insights without losing hours sifting through the noise? That's where BuildBetter.ai comes in. Build Better doesn't just organize your data, it transforms it. Imagine every customer call, every internal discussion instantly turned into structured, actionable insights. That's BuildBetter.ai. Ready to transform how your team handles unstructured data? Head over to BuildBetter.ai and see for yourself. Use code Aakash15 for 15% off your first 3 months and get 5 hours of free recording time. That's buildbetter.ai, because in product management, insights are everything. Fascinating. And one of the things you mentioned there was you don't need to show the pricing of your enterprise plan. I actually want to double click on that detail a little bit more. What are the latest trends? I've noticed some pretty big companies recently have put enterprise pricing finally on their pricing page. But overall, it's still a mixed bag. As you mentioned, probably 30-40% have pricing pages, probably 30-40% have their enterprise pricing available. So what are the latest with enterprise pricing and showing it?
Yeah, well, I mean, Atlassian was probably the first to show enterprise pricing, and they even said, like, we're never going to, we don't negotiate, we don't offer discounts. This is the price, and we think it's fair. Either contact us about it or don't. Like, this is our price. And I think they started doing that probably 10 years ago. And at that point, I thought it might become a trend or catch on, but it really didn't. I mean, you see a few more companies do it, but not everyone. The things that I would think about would be, first, it depends a little bit on whether pricing is an advantage for you or not. And so to the extent that there's legacy vendors in your space or legacy service providers that have charged a significant amount of money or just been really hard to work with, and you can come in with a transparent price that gives them exactly what they want, that is very fair and affordable, even if it's an enterprise plan that's maybe $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, the buyer will be like, oh my gosh, how can I buy this immediately? This is so fair. Like, you're leading with what makes you better than alternatives. And so you remember, you're trying to put your best foot forward with that customer. At the same time, there's a lot of companies that I talk to that tell me, hey, we're in a new category. We're educating the market. There's nothing that exists like what we do. This is totally innovative. And they feel like they need to have a conversation with the customer to understand the use case, right? Define the ROI, fully scope out that purchase before they can share a price. And the last thing I'd want to do in that case is put an artificial price on the website that is like not accurate, because it's going to change for the customer after you go through that exercise, and might shut down a conversation because maybe it's frankly too high for what a lot of folks need based on their use cases. And by the way, once you put a price on that page, that's what your prospects come to expect, and that's what your existing customers come to expect. So if they've been paying more than that, they might come and reach out to you. And I think most companies I talk to, especially early stage businesses, are not ready to lock in one specific price for enterprise just yet, unless it's something that is a really key advantage and differentiator for their business.
Really resonates, especially with this podcast. Not quite ready to lock in that price. So what are the biggest mistakes people make on their pricing page?
Biggest mistakes are, first and foremost, not having one, or and then therefore not capturing that traffic, not being able to educate folks accordingly. Second one is causing a lot of confusion with buyers around all the different plans, all the different features, all the different price points. It's just overwhelming, right? And if you have like Hotjar or any sort of analytics on that page, you might see a super high bounce rate or very little scroll depth because people are just totally overwhelmed, right? And then as part of that, I think that people often have way more jargon on the pricing page than they probably realize, and they haven't done any usability testing around it. Find someone who's never heard of your product. You can use it, user testing, or like any sort of third-party service, or just recruit people in your network. But show them your pricing page without any other context, and then see if they understand what your product does, right? What plans are available, that they think that your pricing is fair, and then they can see themselves in what they would probably buy from your page. If they can't do that in a manner of like 1 to 2 minutes max, your page is probably too complicated. And so for most folks, it's probably too complicated.
That has definitely been my experience on the ground owning many pricing pages. It feels like the pricing page becomes the source of truth within the company for everybody to know what's included in what plan, and it doesn't become a user-centric We've done the usability testing. This is how users know what plan is right for them and directs them towards the next action. So it really goes back to those key principles you mentioned. And one of the other things you mentioned in those key principles is that it's important to have a paywall of some sort as people are moving up these. And some people call these billing gates. I call these feature gates. So let's move on to that. For my money, this is the second most important pricing lever out there. So what are your best practices and your recommendations for handling these feature gates?
Well, it's a great point. So yeah, and your feature gates are helping folks get value from the initial packages. So maybe get value from your free plan, right? And if they don't ever activate and find value, they're probably never going to upgrade to pay, and they're probably going to never expand beyond that. So you have to make sure that you have enough included in the core offerings where you're delivering on the value proposition, but then also not having people able to stay for free in perpetuity regardless of what they do, right? There has to be some, I think of it as like a compelling event that says now is the time that I need to take out my credit card and buy this thing, or now is the time that I should be paying them more money for this thing that I'm liking a lot. And there are feature specific gates or paywalls where I think of that as I liked my product, but I can actually get more if I upgrade. But there's also usage paywalls or other creative paywalls. Like I think one of my all-time favorites is somehow Zoom figured out this thing of, hey, if two people want to meet on Zoom, that can be unlimited. But if it's a group meeting, you got 40 minutes for free. And if you need more time than that, you got to pay us. And that is so powerful because if you're just using Zoom for like internal or personal meetings, that's totally fine. You don't care. You can even just spin up a new Zoom and resend the link. But if it's not an important call, like a sales call, a customer call, call with your boss, you probably don't want that Zoom paywall showing up and kicking you out because you all of a sudden look really unprofessional. And so they started to tap into, you can think of that as a feature gate or a feature benefit, but really that's more of a usage paywall that says these are different profiles of customers. This is a much more valuable use case in customer. They've had plenty of time to experience, what's great about Zoom. And this is the time we're going to tell them they need to take out their credit card and buy this thing. And so I encourage people to be creative in what they think about as these paywalls, and often don't just resort straight to features, but you can resort to interesting progressive paywalls or usage paywalls, where often you give people access to a lot more breadth of functionality, and then you're able to gate on the basis of depth of functionality, right? So as people get set up, maybe they set up their first integrations, and all of a sudden they're pushing a lot more data, they're running a lot more automation through your product, and you can charge based on a number of automation runs, right? And so for that sophisticated user that's gone through the setup work, and they now are seeing all of this time saved through automation, they really hate for that to be stopped halfway through the month because they're still on the free plan. And that way people are willing to invest their time. They're able to see why your product is so good because they can use these great features that you've built. But they also see why it's worth paying more for. So really encourage folks to think about that. And then also think about the discovery of some of these great features. So for most people I talk to, there's a big monetization awareness problem because people understand what they're getting from the product they have access to today, but they don't know what's possible with the product they have not bought yet. And you can educate them through email, you can have in product messages, but there's nothing like having someone try that product themselves. And so that's why I'm a big fan of models like reverse trial that we can talk about, where folks have access to these product capabilities for a period of time, and then those start to go away, right? And so that really triggers a strong feeling of loss aversion, where people value something they've used way more than something they've never touched. It's why everyone tries to get you to try on that pair of jeans when you go clothes shopping. If you try them on and you look in the mirror and you look good, you were buying those jeans, and they're all of a sudden way more valuable to you than they were just sitting on that shelf. And so it's part of this feature gate or feature paywall process really pay a lot of time not just to what is gated, but what is the discovery of that, and how do you drive awareness about the value of those capabilities for the user.
I really like that insight. I feel like I need to chuck the term feature gate away because feature gate makes us think like, let me gate this feature. But really it's about how do you think about a progressive paywall where they've hit aha, they're trying to hit habit, or they're trying to extract more value now. And then you're like, well, if you want to, you need to pay us. And I think that's probably why the metrics on reverse trial look so good as well. In the data that you shared from the OpenView SaaS survey, we actually got to look at how thousands of SaaS companies' conversion rates look. And whether it was free trial, whether it was freemium, these different models, they ultimately had very similar free to paid conversion. Which model stood out? Reverse trial. So I think that's a really powerful insight. So how do people get these paywalls wrong? What are the common mistakes they make?
Well, one that I see a lot is many companies that start off as maybe product-led businesses are super generous on the free plan, and there's no real reason to pay. And so, that's a classic Evernote problem, is that they built a great free plan. It's like a lot of open source companies deal with this too. The open source is really great. Like, why would someone move off of that if they're pretty comfortable with what they have? And so, one is overly generous without creating that compelling event for the customer that now they know that it's time to upgrade. On the flip side, the next mistake is often companies that made the first mistake overcorrect. And a lot of times it comes in where they didn't hit their number, or they started to hire an enterprise sales team that says the free plan is cannibalizing my revenue. All these great logos we want to sell to are stuck on the free plan or stuck on self-serve, and we got to upgrade them to this much more expensive plan. And so the easiest way to do that is just start adding gates, start seeing what these customers are doing, and artificially set the paywall for under those things so that you can charge them more. And that often looks like it works for the next couple of quarters. Those deals convert and everyone's celebrating hitting the near-term revenue goals. But then it ends up, you poke so many holes in that entry-level product that it stops people from ever getting to some sort of aha moment in the product or getting some sort of stickiness. And you start to have this pool that was getting larger and larger of free or of self-serve customers that you could upgrade. Now that pool starts shrinking, right? And it's shrinking both because you've taken the good customers out and you've just made the pool a lot less attractive than it was before. Those are probably the two most common things that I run into. And then the final thing is actually comes back down to the product team themselves. And I tend to find that many product managers, not to throw anyone under the bus, they don't have a good understanding of the ideal customer profile and willingness to pay before they decide what to build. And so if I look at like some of my favorite companies, they've done a lot of that research where they are thinking about monetization potential early in the product development lifecycle. And they're using that as an input to decide what to build. And so they have a plan for where they're going to take packages and pricing. And that plan is baked before they go build the things themselves, as opposed to building products and then going and saying to the PMM or the sales team, hey, we built this great thing. Which package should we be part of? And I would much rather be intentional about it and have a roadmap that drives monetization objectives as kind of part of that input process, rather than building something and then hoping you can monetize it later.
Preach. So we covered
you haven't
my
lived that
second
at all, have you?
my second favorite pricing lever. My third, and I think this is one that probably people over-focus on, which is why I've come to it third, is free-to-paid conversion. So we talked a teeny bit about it, like freemium and free trial are things that affect it versus reverse trial. But can you kind of break down like the levers as someone trying to improve free-to-paid conversion, what they should be focused on?
Yeah, there's a lot to consider. So on free-to-paid conversion, a lot of people jump straight to the offer, right? So are we doing free trial or freemium? Should we change that? Should we, if we have a free trial and it's 14 days, should we go 30 days? Should we go 7 days, right? Should we go reverse trial? There's a lot of those mechanics, and we can and certainly should talk about those. But there's a lot of other levers actually to increase conversion too. The most powerful way to improve conversion, in my experience, is actually marketing to the right customer profile in the first place. And so if you're bringing high quality customers that are in your ideal customer profile, those folks tend to have a way higher conversion likelihood than everyone else. And you have to make sure that you're attracting the right people who are high intent users in your ICP. And often like growth teams bang their head against the wall because they think their conversion experiments aren't working, when really it's just that traffic quality has changed. That's not under their control. So first is like, think about sort of traffic and audience of the folks that you're bringing in to the experience. And then the second thing is actually around the onboarding and activation. And so you generally have a narrow window for folks after they sign up where they either experience value or they don't. And you can tell pretty clearly whether that's going to happen within 24 to 48 hours of sign up. You often give a week or so for activation indicators, but you can tell pretty clearly within a short period of time. And to the extent you're able to get more people to hit their aha moment and see that value early on, you're going to have a much bigger audience that you can convert in the future. And so that's a major lever, right? Activation and onboarding is, you're able to make or break a lot of the conversion events based on that. And then I think the final thing I just flag is the monetization awareness component, and to what extent people are educated on the value of buying in the first place. And that comes in many forms. That could be through email, in-product communication, or you can have a sales rep, right, that you start to bring into the conversion conversation. So instead of it being self-serve conversion, it's a sales assisted or product assisted conversation. But those are the kind of the broad levers that you can pull to improve conversion.
Awesome. So you've pioneered a lot of the major concepts, and I would say like the term product-led sales, you've really contributed to that term's popularity. And a lot of people tie in that product-led sales motion to this free to paid conversion. So can you talk a little bit about how product-led sales fits in with free to paid conversion? And then more importantly, can you help people who have a normal sort of sales model, how do they move towards this product-led sales model?
Absolutely. Well, often what happened in a lot of businesses is that we started to think about like PLG and sales as two very distinct things, right? We had a self-serve business, maybe there was a self-serve revenue owner, and that might have been owned by marketing or product, and then you had the sales team. They were going outbound to folks. They were only kind of measuring what was in Salesforce, like in the CRM, and it was a totally distinct experience. And then we started to realize, well, there might be something interesting around combining these motions to think about one view of the customer. And if we did that, we would maybe make some changes. And it comes back down to, you want to be selling to the right customer at the right time with the right message. And if you have all of this product data of who's using your product and what they're doing and whether they're ready to buy based on the activities, all of a sudden you can find some people that are really likely to buy, and you can figure out exactly what they're interested in and build a sales motion around that. And so in the product-led sales component, I think of that as generally someone that has started with a product interaction, but has either not paid at all or maybe bought some sort of light self-serve. And you can look at data around, hey, is this a customer that's in our ideal customer profile from an account standpoint, where the value of that account is worth someone's time? And are they demonstrating activity or intent where they're likely to buy? And then start to refine the sales motion accordingly. And there's going to be some of those folks that are perfect ICP fit, that are using the product like crazy, and sales actually becomes more of like an order taking activity, right? Because they had such high buying propensity. But then there's also people that maybe are great accounts but got stuck on the product. Maybe because your self-serve product wasn't really built for that kind of enterprise customer, they tried to set up a certain integration and failed. The sales motion actually starts to look more like a customer success motion of, hey, let's set up this integration for you. And oh, by the way, do you have any questions around the buying process? We're happy to be a resource. And now all of a sudden you start to navigate them to a shared outcome. And then there's other groups where maybe you have a bunch of end users or individuals within a company buying. Maybe they have distinct licenses. And you can tell, hey, there's 20 different Calendly licenses at Apollo or whatever it is. Let's have someone take that information and say, hey, there's something here. This company is very interested in our product. They would probably be better off if they had this all under one account that they could manage with a predictable bill. They could also have some better collaboration features instead of all of these things being separate. We're going to use this as a signal to reach out to the decision maker or ask our best users to introduce us to the decision maker. And it unlocks a different playbook. But I think the key thing for product-led sales is it's not one sales motion. It's not like there's this one thing that you do that all of a sudden is product-led sales. It is looking at people that are using your product, understanding the data around who they are and what they're doing and what their intent is, and designing these plays that's going to help them be more successful with your product and ultimately spend more. And that overlap, right, of the PLG and sales can actually be more powerful than the parts when they're just treated as separate.
That's exactly what I like to say to people is it's more like a CSM sort of model at the beginning when you're engaging with them. You're trying to figure out, okay, how can I help you succeed more? You're trying to also qualify the opportunity a little better. You have this hypothesis that it could be better if they're all under one account or they have 50 salespeople but only 10 seats. You can kind of validate that and then you come in with the sales motion. So it's about using product data, putting on sort of a customer success sort of hat and then doing the sale. And that's how actually some companies, including Apollo, use product-led sales to drive up their conversion pretty significantly. So the final pricing lever I want to touch on today, and I think this is the one that most people neglect, is cancellation. And you've written quite a bit about good versus bad cancellation flows. So what makes a great cancellation flow?
Makes a great cancellation flow. Well, it's easier to tell the bad than the great. I personally think Canva is the one of the best I've ever seen, and so for folks that are looking for examples, that's one of my go-tos. But the great ones remind you of what you're giving up, and so they help you. Like I actually went to cancel my Canva account the other day, as I thought I wasn't using it as much as I was before. And they reminded me I had used the background remover feature like 250 times, which is insane, first of all. But it really created this feeling of like, oh wow, I've actually gotten a lot of value from this product. They also reminded me that I was actually on a discounted plan, that if I were to cancel, the price would be more expensive if I wanted to revisit Canva. And so that wasn't in an aggressive way that made me feel like they were strong-arming me. It was more of a helpful, hey, like, you're using this, you're getting value, and just by the way, we think you should probably keep this kind of way. So that is a really kind of interesting opportunity for folks to personalize the cancellation flow that in a value-centric way that does not turn off people or overly invest in dark patterns. Other things that I tend to find is there tends to be some sort of survey, right, as part of the cancellation flow. And so you're asking a few questions like, hey, why are you canceling? And then you might personalize what you do based on that information. Now, you got to be a little bit careful with this because I know people that the first thing they do when they buy a new product is go to cancel it and say that they're canceling because the price is too high, and then they kind of expect a discount on it. Like I did that with The Economist recently and saved 50% on my renewal. And so there are some downsides to doing this, but you can get more creative than just going straight to the discount, right? There's some things that you can do where, hey, maybe they actually ran into a product issue and you can offer a phone number that they can talk to with customer support. Maybe they didn't have enough time in the free trial, so you can offer them a 30-day extended trial for free, right? Maybe they have a seasonal use, and so you can actually pause the account, right, and then resume it in a few months, which is a pretty common thing in a number of industries. But there's going to be a variety of cancellation reasons, some of which are actionable for you and some of which are not actionable. You want to collect the data either way to understand, the customer and what you could have done differently, and then you might want to do something with that data. But that's a second step, up to you. Final thing I would just say is that you can either earn or lose a lot of trust in the cancellation process because it's the last thing that a customer goes through. And so if they had a really bad cancellation process where they felt like they had to really jump through hoops to cancel your product, it's going to be unlikely that they want to recommend your product in the future or they sign up again. And I would be hesitant to do this to some of your customers because a lot of times they leave because they're just changing jobs and they want to bring your product to their next job, or there's something else that makes them a really valuable person that you should not give a bad experience to. I think back to one of the first gyms I tried to cancel. They made me write a letter and mail it to an address that was out of state in order to cancel my gym membership. Like, I was not ever going to go back there for anything, right, after that. And so just remember that, ideally people should be able to cancel in a frictionless way in-app, worst case via message, but ideally in-app, and that actually creates value for you, even if it's going to be hard for you to measure that immediately.
Thank you for all that wisdom on kind of the most important pricing levers. So now let's move from levers to quick wins. You recently did a pretty interesting study on cataloging what some might be that people could pursue. So can you kind of briefly give people a high-level teaser on what are the key wins they could think about from a pricing point of view?
As much as I love talking strategy, many folks need to put points on the board, right, immediately, and especially if you're new in a role, being able to deliver some real wins creates a lot of trust and lets folks sort of consider your opinion much more valuable than a lot other topics because they see that you're kind of quickly adding value for the business. And in pricing and packaging, it's a fascinating area for quick wins because people don't think that there are quick wins in pricing, right? It's something that feels so daunting to change. It's very disruptive for your customers, sales, marketing, product, the CEO all have their different opinions of it. And so it feels like the kind of thing that you don't even want to touch, let alone find a quick win in. But some of the quick wins are more analytical in nature. And so one of them that's probably one of my favorites is to do an actual data-driven retrospective on the last pricing change. I almost guarantee you no one has done this in the business. And if you ask people how the last pricing change went, you'll get a bunch of different answers, especially if you're in a fast-growing business when a lot of people weren't even there when the last pricing change happened. Some might say, oh yeah, we lost a bunch of customers, or yeah, it got a lot harder to sell, or oh yeah, I don't really remember, I think it was fine. Right? You really don't get that really objective source of truth. And what I tend to find when I do this analysis is I look at what happened to win rates or conversion rates, what happened to time to close, what happened to starting deal size, what happened to churn, what happened to expansion, and you can look at the quarter or month before the pricing change and the quarter after the pricing change, and those two cohorts. I tend to find that revenue increased significantly, and that it often did not overly impact or maybe didn't have any negative impact at all to key metrics like conversion. And so you might not have gone far enough, but you might also realize that there's certain segments where that wasn't the case, or there were some benefits of certain metrics and some challenges. And so you maybe didn't get it perfectly. I mean, it's hard to ever get anything perfectly. So there's still opportunity to consider another pricing change. And this data allows you to actually go in with a really objective perspective on what to do. And that's something that you can do that analysis in a matter of a couple of days, or maybe even a few hours. and all of a sudden find an insight that's going to bring millions of dollars, right, to the business. And then there's some other things that folks can consider when it comes to pricing quick wins. I think that one example for me is just how you communicate pricing on the pricing page. A lot of times small changes, for instance, do you default to showing the price per month when billed annually or the price per month when billed monthly? Changes like that can actually make a big difference of whether someone buys an annual plan and then, spends that extra money, renews at higher rates versus buys a monthly plan. And then some of the communication you do around monetization and what are the benefits of the premium plans, and just some small copy changes or more value-based messaging and being able to trigger communications after someone's already experienced that value. Some of those kind of monetization awareness things are not changing the pricing itself, but giving you a lot more revenue as a result of like really communicating that pricing in the most effective way.
I love that. And just a couple others that you included in the piece that I think people should consider. One is adjusting prices to meet psychological thresholds. If you're at 28, what about $29.99? Another is to revisit feature gating or feature paywalls, as we talked about, by tier, thinking about how you make it really quick and easy for people to understand what they're getting by moving up another tier. You also talked about turning overages into a cash cow, which is the idea that like you let people taste things and then you charge for usage based on top. And you also mentioned give to get discounts. This is one of the ones that I think very few people use, but what are the most popular get asks and how do you actually manage that? For instance, do you need a review? Then potentially you could have them get a discount for a review, or you need a case study, or you want their logo on your website. So I think people should think about these quick wins as ways to establish the momentum for their bigger roadmap against all the other levers that we talked about today. So that's kind of our quick tour through pricing. I feel like we really covered everything someone would need to know to go from 0 to 1 on pricing. So thanks so much for that. Now we're ready for the lightning round. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. What's your favorite hobby?
Tennis.
How often do you play?
I try to play twice a week or so. I'm actually the chair of a Boston kind of social tennis group. So I often spend as much of my time organizing tennis as I do playing. But I love playing, and don't get me started on pickleball because they're taking over our courts.
Well, kudos to you and your knees especially, because I used to be a tennis player my whole life, but now that I'm in my mid-30s, the knees are just giving up.
Are you saying have you moved to pickleball now in your old
I moved
age?
to ping pong, even worse.
Okay. I'm fine with ping pong.
What's something very few people know about you?
Very few people know about me. I'm kind of an open book, so I don't know if there's a lot of those things, but one thing I will say is I'm a massive stand-up comedy nerd, and so that obviously doesn't probably come through on like LinkedIn or my newsletter. I'm not posting memes all that much. Maybe I should, but I love to go to stand-up shows. I have a list of like hundreds of comedians that if they're ever in Boston, I will drop what I'm doing and go see them. I love it.
Best show you've seen recently?
Best show I've seen recently. I saw Ronnie Chang in Boston recently. He's on The Daily Show. It's quite funny.
Nice. What's your favorite interview question?
My favorite interview question is not really like a classic question. I like to do a case study interview. So I like to give someone a real life situation that I've been facing or that has come up in a related role, and understand how they'd react to it, and ideally how we solve that problem together. And obviously the question will vary based on the specific role that I'm hiring for, but I find that it's the best way to drop the pretense of interviewing where everyone's positioning themselves as like doing everything and like I drove this much impact at this company, I'm a rock star. It's like, yeah, we get that. But like, let's see if we can solve a really hairy problem together that there's not one right answer. And so it's more about your thought process and how we're going to collaborate than it is about like being exactly right. And the other thing is it allows them to actually be intellectually engaged in the company and in the problems, because I think for a lot of folks in the interview process that are on the candidate side, they kind of go through an interview process that's meant to sell them on the role and why it's so great, and everything looks like it's amazing in the company, and then they go join and it's like, oh my gosh, what did I sign up for? But if you can help kind of be more transparent around what's working and what's not working, they can, understand what they're signing up for, but also hopefully that draws them in where they're more excited about the role because of it.
Love it. What's your favorite product or growth book?
So I will admit I don't read a lot of product and growth books. I probably should, but I don't have the total attention span for books. I'm much more of a newsletter kind of guy, but I do have to give a shout out to Monetizing Innovation, given this topic, and I have actually read that one. That was written by my former boss at Simon Kucher, Madhavan Ramanujam, and it is a fantastic primer on all things pricing and packaging, especially if you're in product or kind of building and launching new products.
All right, we'll include that in the description. What's a newsletter you love reading?
You mean besides product growth?
And Growth Unhinged?
I have to say that. So I'll give a shout out for a newer newsletter that I started reading in the last 6 months or so. It's called Marketing Ideas by Tom Orbach. He gives one really specific, really tactical marketing idea per week. Many of them are off the wall. He wrote one about why you should start a viral game as a marketing campaign. He has a bunch of other kind of crazy ideas, but the thing is, his ideas they initially seem kind of crazy oftentimes, but they're things he's actually done. And so he'll get into the specifics of why they did them, how they worked, and how you can do it. So I just love it.
And he has the cred too. If you guys have heard about Google's failed acquisition of Wiz, he leads growth marketing at Wiz. So pretty phenomenal guy. What's a new product you've started using and enjoy?
New product. I've tried so many products, but there's so many of them that I literally am that person that uses it for a week and then doesn't keep using it. I am one of those people that shows up in your data. One exception is Pitch. I started using Pitch for presentations and just found it super, super helpful. So big fan of that.
Cool. This one I feel like for you will be interesting because you spent the last 8 years as a VC, but I still want to ask it. What product feature or product are you most proud of working on? So this maybe is something you helped a portfolio company with.
Product feature or product? Probably the most proud moment for me was a portfolio company that's since had an acquisition called Logical. They're legal tech business in the e-discovery space, and they launched a pay-as-you-go offering with a free trial that we worked on for a while together, and that really changed the trajectory of the business and was also really opened my eyes to the power of usage-based pricing when done right. But that was really fun, both a totally disruptive pricing model in an industry like legal that was not used to it, and something that was a fantastic team willing to try new things, and just a great thing to work on.
I love to hear about those disruptive pricing changes. What commonly held belief or saying do you disagree with?
One that I've been thinking about lately is this belief in an MVP. And I don't know, maybe with your audience, I'm going to get a lot of pushback on this, but there's a lot of institutionalized view of if you're not embarrassed by your product, you've shipped too late. And I think that there's definitely some kernels of that are valuable insights, but increasingly today there are software products for everything that you can imagine, and there's probably a pretty decent one. And so this idea of like we can just build something that's totally novel that people are going to start using, and like it's fine if there's a bunch of flaws in it. I don't know if that's the way to build something that's going to last anymore. And so more and more I'm seeing folks build with this concept of like a minimum remarkable product where there has to be something that is really compelling for a specific group of people. And they often don't necessarily launch all at one go, right? They might say, we're going to actually keep this in beta or with a wait list and just kind of steadily open up more and more folks from the wait list to get it to that period where it really is remarkable before going like full open launch.
Yeah, I think it is commonly held advice, but more and more people are getting into that, whether it's calling it MLP for minimum lovable or MRP for minimum remarkable. So I love that take. So we want to end kind of the serious questions on failure corner. What's one failure that you've learned from?
Most of the failures I've had have come down to people management, either hiring people that weren't a good fit, or having or kind of not making decisions to move people out of the business right fast enough when it was clear it wasn't working out on both sides. And so I think the thing that I've learned though is that it's never possible to totally solve those. Like you're not just going to get your hiring rate at 100% perfect. And so like obviously hire slow, is the way to go, and be really kind of diligent and excited about candidates. But I think the thing that I got more confident in is around understanding that people can be really fantastic individuals and really smart people, but it's not the right kind of organization for them and not the right set of goals that utilize their skill set. And the more upfront you can be in having that open conversation, even though it's hard, it's often appreciated on both sides.
I resonate very strongly with that one. Thanks for sharing. Where can people find you online?
I'm very online, probably too online. And find me on LinkedIn or through my newsletter, Growth Unhinged. And if you like the newsletter, you can hit reply. I read every reply. I respond to the vast majority of them. So I'm terminally online, very available.
Awesome. And how can listeners help you?
Listeners can help me by just being part of the community. So I'm kind of constantly sharing observations, insights, and one of the things that I get inspired by is in the stand-up comedy community where they test out a joke. It might bomb with an audience, or it might do, maybe somewhat well, and they refine the words, they define the examples, like they kind of keep punching it up until their hour-long set is ready to go. And I actually I take a not too dissimilar process because I'm building in public. I'm often putting out ideas that are things that I think are true, but they're not like 100% baked, backed by a ton of research. And so I put them out on LinkedIn, see what people think, learn a lot from the comments, often have conversations about them, and then really refine the perspectives in what I share in the newsletter. But like just engage. Like, do you agree? Do you not agree? What do you think? What's been your experience? That is so valuable for me, and I think it's also just valuable from a community standpoint. We can all level up together.
A LinkedIn comment is not as expensive as you think, listener. So drop it on Kyle's next post, and thanks so much for being here, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.